Technology is changing the way we do business, the way we communicate in business, but the real question is, has it changed the way we as leaders actually lead our businesses? Welcome to another edition of People, Performance, and Profits. I remember when I was about 12 years old, I had the opportunity to buy my first Walkman. That was the first real piece of technology that I had back then. You put your cassette in there, you could take your AM, FM, listen to your headphones, clip it to your belt. It was a big unit. A number of years later, MP3 players came out. No longer did I have to put a cassette in. I could plug it into my computer, download all of my music, or at least hundreds of songs at that particular time, and now I could take that with me. And if I wanted to change music, I plug it back into my computer, and I was able to change music. In 2001-ish, the iPod came out, and that thing was awesome. You could now download thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of songs into the machine. You could put in pictures and other games at that particular time. But in order to transfer that information, we still had to plug into our computers. Our computer, our PC, was the hub that we had to get everything from. But eventually, things changed. The cloud came. All of that music, all of those pictures went to the cloud, and we didn't need to use our computer to download that information anymore. We could download it from our phone, we could download it from our iPod, we can download it from our iPad, or down to different PCs. Things changed because of the way technology changed. Now let's think about it from a leadership perspective. Leaders need to change. Back in the day, leaders were very much like that centralized PC. We decided the flow of information. We had control over the innovation and the decision making, just like the technology of old. But you and I both know things changed. As technology became more available to all of our teams, they began to know more than some of us leaders, and it started to change the paradigm. But that top-down leadership approach wouldn't work or doesn't work in an environment where information is free. It's no longer about directing our teams to do the work. It's something bigger. That model has turned itself completely upside down. In fact, with our younger generation of teams, it's almost like they're allergic if they're in a situation where they have to ask for permission before they can make a contribution. Things have changed. Everybody knows the name, the big brand Burberry. Right? They've been around for 150, 160 years, something along those lines. But like some of the other big brands of their time, in the 90s, Burberry struggled. All the decision making was kept at the top. All of the design options were kept at the top until Angela Ahrendts came in as CEO and really started to change the way that Burberry ran. She gave the control over the design to individuals that were closer to the customer instead of coming from the top down. Angela was the one that brought in the idea of using social and the internet to drive their brand. In fact, one of their key differentiators was their digital connection with their customers. She knew as technology changed, as the way we do business changed, she had to give more autonomy and more authority to those individuals and support those individuals that were closer to the customer. The paradigm shifted. Now, Angela was ultimately recruited by Apple and recently left Apple after she did some fantastic work there, but using the same principles, no longer of a top-down approach, but really as a leadership as a mechanism to support the teams and make them more effective. There's two primary changes that have occurred as a result of technology in the way we lead. Number one, transparency. You and I as leaders no longer get to choose what's public and what remains private. It's the public that chooses what they want to know about us, or our colleagues that choose what should be disclosed about us. That's primary change number one. Primary change number two is really the definition of teams. When I got into my first leadership job, my team was with me all the time. I could see them, I could touch them, we could have conversations. Every morning we had a cup of coffee. But the definition of teams is very different today. In some organizations, you may see your team members via video or FaceTime or something a couple of times a year, but in person, in some instances, it might be more than a year before you actually interact with that individual. So team dynamics have changed, transparency has changed. No longer does the world revolve around leaders. So with all of this change that's happening as a result of digital transformation, what do we have to understand as leaders? There's really three primary things that we need to do. Number one, as leaders, we need to make sure we have a compelling purpose. In previous videos, I've talked about this focus on purpose from a practical perspective because it's really clear. Employees will work for money, but they will follow a leader and they will perform because of a purpose. And unfortunately, as I talk to leaders today and I ask them the question, what's the purpose of the business? It's all about making money or it's all about corporate social responsibility. Neither one of those is the right purpose. It's purpose beyond profits. Number two, we have to learn to influence our teams so that we can reorient their decision-making that aligns with the organization and not have to direct them and tell them what to do because, as we've seen, that doesn't work anymore. It's about influence. And number three, in a world that is superficially connected, it's our opportunity as leaders to actually connect with our teams in order to influence them. You know, everybody is on LinkedIn, but so much of the population feels left out because how superficial those connections are. You know, a couple years ago, there was a study done that looked at leaders that had done a nice job of transforming from the old leadership style to really supporting their teams in the right way in order to have that influence, to communicate that purpose and that vision, and to be able to deal with the challenges of remote workforces. And they came up with 7 core competencies that were consistent across all those leaders where they could see that the organizations had made that shift, performance was there, profitability was there. And those 7, the first one started with this idea of humility, which is not something as leaders that we like to talk a lot about. But this whole concept of humility is kind of twofold. Number one, truly let people know that you need them. Right? In the past as leaders, it was they need us, we don't need them. But today's world, to be able to have the influence to get them to perform, let people know you actually need them. The second part of this idea of humility is to be open to constructive criticism from people that work for you, not just people that you work for. Feedback is great at all levels. None of us are perfect. And because we're no longer a top-down management or leadership style, because we know it doesn't work, we've got to focus on that bottom up. And it starts with having a little bit of humility. Some humbleness goes a long way. Number two, the second core competency was adaptability, the willingness to change when new information comes up. You know, as a politician, if you ever look at politicians, if they ever change their view on a particular topic, they get lambasted, even though they may have changed due to new information, right? As leaders, sometimes we're afraid to go from position A to position B, but it's based off of new information. Today, because that information is so easily accessible, we have got to be able to make that decision and to change our approach and be adaptable to what's going on around us. So number two is this competency of adaptability. Number three, I've already mentioned, the ability to communicate and have a very clear vision and purpose. Now, this doesn't mean you know exactly how you're going to get there, but clarity around where you're taking your team, where you're taking the organization is going to be critical. And then your team will figure out how to get there along with clarity and insight because of your vision. So having a clearly articulated vision is this idea of competency number 3. The fourth critical competency for leaders today is this idea of engagement. And there's really two pieces to this. On the front end, it's about asking the right questions when we're engaging with our teams. Not just the surface stuff of, how was your day? How many people are actually going to say, my day's really crappy, can you help me out? That's just not the way we answer. Good leaders ask really deep, good questions. The quality of a leader can also often be measured by the quality of the questions they ask. What's working? What's not working? What have you tried to overcome that situation? How can I help? Creating a scenario where the leader can provide value. Now, on the back end of that is the ability or the desire to listen. We can talk all day long as leaders, but the truly effective leaders listen, pick up cues as they're listening to the answers from their teams. That front side questioning, the back side listening is what makes up this core competency of engagement. That's what real employee engagement is all about. The feel-good stuff outside of that is helpful, but it doesn't replace that two-way conversation, starting with questions and ending up with listening. The fifth core competency that was common across all of these great leaders that seem to be making this transition in this new digital age is the idea of hyper-awareness of both the opportunities and threats internal to the organization and external to the particular team that they're leading. Now, this is understanding and having true conversation with the team about, here's our strengths, here's where we have opportunities. Think about it as a SWOT analysis, but not hiding anything back. Being hyper aware of what's going on internally in the organization and hyper aware of what's happening that impacts the organization from the outside, in terms of competition, in terms of financial situations, understanding that impact and talking about the solutions to that impact are critical. Number 6 is understanding how to use data and making decisions with data. You know, there was a time, even when I looked for leaders, and a lot of our clients looked for leaders, it was kind of looking for people with a lot of intuition and gut feel around making certain decisions. And we all do that as leaders to a certain extent. But as data becomes more readily accessible, we need to be able to look at that data and make decisions based on that data, confirm it with our gut, but not making 100% of our decision based on gut, based on intuition. That's an important thing to look for. But today, we need to understand that people will make decisions based on real data because we have access to so much more information. This is what's making leaders really effective in today's day and age, especially when there's so much data that's available to us. And then the last one, number 7, is really pace, the pace of change, being able to keep up with the pace and trying to stay ahead of the pace of change in technology, in market conditions, and so forth. Willing to make decisions quickly based on that data from competency number 6. You know, we can no longer direct our teams really to do anything. Our job as leaders is to continue to provide value to them so that they're impacted, they can make decisions and help them orient those decisions so they're supportive of your organization, your department, and your individual leadership style. But in order to continue to be successful as a leader, we've got to keep making these shifts. What I would recommend for you is to think about these 7 core competencies and really measure yourself and rate yourself against them on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being not so good, 5 being that core competency is inherent and innate to you. And then the second piece to that is those that you rank a 1 or 2, what can you do to improve that? You know, leadership is changing. The pace of change is happening. But keeping your eye on the ball and understanding as leaders the value you provide to your team and the shifts that you need to make will continue to keep you in the game. We'll see you next time.